Hello everybody, how you all doing? Everybody good? Ready to look at some bikes? Today's show is a shout out for a couple of comments I got, one from Chris. Can you compare some of the Vitus range to the bigger brands? They look like good value. The ZX1 and the Vitesse to the SL7 would be awesome. And then I got another comment from Chucky. Could you take a look at the Cube Agree range? Feel like it offers tremendous value, especially the base model with full Ultegra aeroframe carbon rims for €2,500. So yes, we will look at some of these bikes. I also have something else I've been working on that I want to show you and get your opinion on. So let's get on with it. Okay, I'm actually going to go on about some numbers for a few minutes here. If you'd rather not watch all this, there's links down below that you can skip ahead to the different parts of this video, so feel free to do that. Here's the thing that I want to run by you and get your opinion on. If you've been following my channel for a while, you might remember something I called the Bikotic bike value formula, where I take the price of the bike and the weight of the bike and come up with a value score for it, which then means with a range of bikes I can arrange them in some kind of order according to their value score, which works well when the manufacturers list their weights, but unfortunately that seems to be becoming less and less and the actual opposite to what we want. Anyway, all that aside, one thing that the bike manufacturers are quite consistent with is listing the geometry figures for the frames of their bikes, which got me to thinking I could probably make a formula that could arrange a bunch of bikes in order of raciness to comfort and stability. So that's what I've done, and that's what I'm going to show you, and I'd like your opinions on it. Tell me if you think this works. I think it's pretty cool, so yeah, comment down below, let me know what you think. These are the bikes we're going to look at in the formula. Now I'm 5'10", and I thought I might as well collect data for the bike for my size. When I did this, I realized that the different sizing from manufacturers is quite a lot more inconsistent than I had realized, and you should never assume that you're a certain size, like a medium or a 56 like I had. Most of these websites have a little calculator where you work out what size you are. So it seemed to me that Vitesse were suggesting I use the large, Cube the 56, Merida medium, and then Canyon for the Aeroad it was a medium, but they were definitely suggesting the small in the Ultimate and the Endurace, Trek 56, Cervelo 56, Tarmac Roubaix 56, but then a 54 in the Diverge. So even within a manufacturer's range you need to check the sizing as well, because that seems to be different. So the next thing I looked at was the virtual top tube length, and I actually thought maybe this was a more consistent figure to look at, and decided to actually use the medium for the Ultimate and the Endurace, because they are all pretty close to 56. So hopefully everybody agrees that that is the most consistent measurement to go with when choosing the sizing. Let me know what you think about that down below. So for each of these sizes I then grabbed the wheelbase, the reach, the stack, the chainstay, the head angle, the fork rake and the bottom bracket drop. Now in hindsight I may have to drop the fork rake, because where you see the yellow, these manufacturers don't actually list their fork rake. I thought this would be a pretty standard measurement, but no, it wasn't available for a lot of these bikes. So where it's yellow, I've had to guess, depending on the bike, and grabbing the numbers from the other bikes as to what it might be. But I've left it in for now because it was too much work to take it out for this test project. So basically the formula looks at each measurement. So wheelbase, it collects the lowest, it collects the highest, and then works out the range. I do that for each of the measurements. I add them all up and then average them. And basically, the longer the wheelbase, the more stable the bike, the longer the reach, the more racy, the higher the stack, the more comfortable, the shorter the chainstay, the more zippy, the slacker the head angle, the more comfy and stable, the shorter the rake, the faster the steering, and the lower the bottom bracket, the more stable and comfortable the bike will be. So then the lower the number that you get for each bike, the more racy it is, and the higher the number, the more stable and comfortable it is. So if we take that list of numbers and then sort it, this is what we get. And this is where it's a bit more interesting. If we go to this side here, I put the specialized Diverge in as a control, because it's going to be the longest, slackest, most stable bike out of this group in theory. And as we can see, that definitely is the case according to the formula. And the smaller this blue line is, in theory, the more racy the bike is. And what we're going to do now is look through this stack of bikes, compare them, and see if we think the formula kind of has worked. So if you haven't fallen asleep with me wobbling on about all those numbers, let's have a look through the stack. First up in the list is the S-Works Diverge. This is the red E-Tap Access Eagle version, £10,800. Big fat tyres, Future Shock 2, dropper post, One buy, nice bike if you want to go and do some gravel riding. It's even got a little storage box to keep your sandwiches in. So next on the list is the Vitus Zenium CRS Di2. And if we fade through to that, that's this bike here. This is the top of the Zenium range, and for $3,000 you get Ultegra Di2. So that is pretty good value, I think. And we like Vitus. They list their weights, and for a medium it's 8.05 kilograms. And at first glance I thought this was an aluminium bike, but it's not. It's actually a full carbon bike. So if we get up the next bike, which is the Cube Attain SL, and fade through to that, we notice that the front end of the Cube Attain is a lot higher up than the Zenium, and you could quite easily think that the formula's got it wrong there, and that the Cube is more laid back than the Vitus. But if we go back to the numbers, it's quite interesting, because what it shows is the Zenium is a bit of an outlier. It has a relatively long wheelbase, very similar reach. It has a racier stack than the Cube. They both got the same chainstay length, quite a lot actually. But the Zenium has a slacker head angle, which is more laid back. No fork rate for the Cube, so they've got the same on that. And then the Cube's bottom bracket is quite a bit lower down. And all in all, they're very similar in the formula, but I think it's the head angle and the wheelbase that has made the Zenium come out as quite a laid back bike, albeit with quite a low front end. So that's quite interesting, really, if you're a bit of a nerd like me. Anyway, I like the look of this Cube. I've got the 2019 Cube Attain Race version, which has Tiagra on it, and I think it's a pretty cool bike. This would make an excellent winter bike, and I like the colour. I think that looks cool. Next up is the Cube Attain GTC SL. So no surprise there, because that is just the carbon version of what we just looked at. So they have the same geometry, albeit that the aluminium version has a much larger spacer on it. Cube lists their weights as well, so we dig that. This one's quite a bit lighter than the aluminium one, 8.7 kilograms. Obviously you have to pay for that. Something that I do find quite funny about Cube bikes is they clearly photograph them upside down, which makes the chain look like it's defying gravity. So back to our list, and the next bike up is the Specialized Roubaix, which according to this graph is a bit more racy than the Cubes that we've just looked at. So let's get that up and have a look. Fading through to the S-Works Roubaix. This is the SRAM Red ETAP Access version, humongously expensive at £11,200. Comes in this snazzy green colour. Fading between the two, we can see that the formula probably has got that about right. Interestingly, if you compare this to the Diverge, it's kind of as you would expect it. The wheelbase of the Diverge is a lot longer. It's clearly got bigger, fatter tyres. But the one weird thing is the Diverge is quite a lot longer, as you can see there, and that's presumably why the Specialized website suggests that you get a smaller version to the Roubaix or the Tarmac. So that's the Roubaix. Next up, the Canyon Endurace. So let's fade through to the Endurace. Very different shaped bikes, that's for sure. This Endurace has got the new Dura Ace Di2 on it. And thank you, Canyon. You list the weight as well, 7.1 kilograms. This is the top of the range Endurace, the SLX 9, 7,399 pounds. Quite an interesting sort of burgundy colour. Not entirely sure about that. Quick look at the graph again, and our next bike up is the Cube Agree. So this is the bike Chucky wanted to look at. So let's fade through to the Cube Agree. There we go. It's actually quite a nice looking bike. Clearly got the more laid back, compact crankset on it in comparison to the Endurace. But it actually looks quite racy and quite aerodynamic, this bike. So to actually see it in this list here and see where it pops up, I think that's quite useful, because clearly you probably wouldn't buy this as a full-blown race bike like you would these ones up here. But at first glance you might think that that's what it was for. I do find this handlebar angle a bit odd. That looks a bit weird to me. So on the UK website this comes in at £2,999. So a bit more than the €2,500 that Chucky saw it for. Maybe it's cheaper where he lives. Actually quite heavy, this one, at 8.5 kilograms. But you can get this little Tupperware box to clip onto the frame to keep your sandwiches in, which is quite cool, and actually makes the bike more aerodynamic. And Chucky thought that the wheels were carbon, but on this version they're not. They're actually anodized grey aluminium wheels, I believe. Not cheap wheels, but they probably are quite heavy, hence the bike is quite heavy. So next up in our list we've got the Vitus Razor VR. If I fade through to that, This is an aluminium bike, pretty heavy, 10.3 kilograms, but super cheap, £800. Saw a group set. I don't like the fact they've photographed it in the small ring at the front. I think that looks a little bit naff. And it has cable actuated disc brakes, which we've talked about before. Don't like those. But nice and cheap, good winter bike, I guess. What I forgot to say about the Agree is I disagree. I don't like that name at all. It kind of doesn't work in English. Agree, it seems like a weird name for a bike. So I'd probably think about changing that cube. Just seems a bit odd. Now then, interestingly, right in the middle of the pack here, we've got the new Cervelo R5 that we looked at the other day. Now it's interesting because I assumed that that would be all the way up here in the super twitchy race bike category, but it's not. It's right in the middle, indicating that it's relatively laid back according to this formula, and maybe that's a good thing when it comes to winning Grand Tours. And as we know, that won the Vuelta a España this year, albeit with Primož Roglič on it, not just the bike. So if we fade through to that from the Razor, that's the Cervelo R5 there. And then right next to the Cervelo R5 is the Canyon Ultimate. And again, I found that quite interesting. I assume this would be in a more sort of racy part of the graph, but the formula is saying that it is actually mid-pack. That's super light, this bike, 6.29 kilograms, partly due to the fact you don't get much padding on the saddle. But is it just me, or does this bike look a little bit old-fashioned now? Definitely about time Canyon updated the Ultimate, even down to the cables looking a little bit messy and scraggly around here. Just my opinion. Now if you compare the Ultimate to the Endurace, that's actually a really good example of two bikes that if you saw them side by side you would think they were pretty much the same bike. But actually you can see that the Endurace is definitely more of an endurance bike as reflected in the graph. So I think that is quite a good example that this is working. You've got the Ultimate there and the Endurace there. Next up, the Vitesse EVO from Vitus. And this is one of the bikes that Chris wanted to compare to a Tarmac, which we'll do in a minute. But that's comparing it there to the Ultimate. It is quite a bit lower down at the front, it would seem. In fact, the Vitesse does seem kind of small around here. Do you think they do that to save money on materials? But this bike is 7.65 kilograms and it's £3,000 mechanical Ultegra. And we'll compare it to the SL7, which is what Chris asked me to do, even though the SL7 is further down the list, but let's compare it. Here's the new Dura Ace Di2 version of the SL7 Tarmac. And that's comparing between the two there. All pretty similar at the back, other than the Tarmac's probably more aero. Got the aero seat post on it. And if we head up the front, again, the Vitesse is much smaller around here. There we go. And if we go back to our graph, it actually turns out that the Vitesse and the ZX1, which is the next bike we're going to look at from Vitus, they have exactly the same geometry, other than the stack on the ZX1 is a tiny bit lower. And if we fade between the two, that's what they look like. Very, very similar, other than the ZX1 is clearly more aero. In this photo here of the ZX1, it's got an extremely high seat post, which looks a bit weird. Now I know somebody who's got both of these bikes, the Vitesse and the ZX1. I've never seen him ride the ZX1. He definitely prefers the Vitesse, except what he has done is take the Reynolds deep section wheels off the aero bike and put them on his Vitesse. So make of that what you will. Pricing wise, the ZX1 is £100 more expensive, but heavier. So we're getting to the much more racy end of the spectrum here. And next up is the Canyon Aeroad, and this is actually quite a good bike to compare the ZX1 to. And if I fade through to the Canyon, this is the Aeroad CFR disc, and this is the Vanderpoel version, Dura Ace Di2, £10,000, 7.24 kilograms. And if we fade between them here, yep, definitely this is a better looking bike to the ZX1 for sure. Now Canyon had loads of problems with the handlebars on this bike. Hopefully that's all sorted out now. Very big gap there between the fork and the frame. On this particular version you get Vanderpoel's logo on the front, so no pressure there. And interestingly on this version, I can't see it on the other versions of the Aeroad. You get this sort of rubber sock on the seat post. Presumably this is for when you're riding Paris-Roubaix to stop all the dirt and grit getting down and corroding your seat post. But as far as I can see, this is the only version with that, and it does look a bit weird. And if you're going to buy this Aeroad, well, you might as well get the t-shirt as well. Nice. So, the Trek Emonda, slightly more racy than the Aeroad. Let's have a look. Here's the Emonda SLR 9, £11,000. Got the same group set as the Aeroad, except that the Aeroad has the power meter and the Emonda doesn't. Cheeky. So fading between the two, it's hard to tell why the Emonda would be listed as more racy in the formula, so let's have a look. The Emonda's wheelbase is slightly shorter, reach and stack very, very similar, same chainstay length, same head angle. Now then, this is where the fork rake has caused a bit of a problem. Canyon don't list it, so I put 44, which is what the Tarmac is listed as having, and Trek do list their fork rake and it's 40, so that is why the Emonda has come out with a more racy number than the Aeroad. Fading between the two, they look remarkably similar, really. Just that slightly shorter wheelbase on the Emonda. What I forgot to do was show you the Aeroad to the Ultimate. And that's fading between those there. And the Aeroad has come out as being more racy than the Ultimate. And that is because the Ultimate wheelbase is longer, the reach is shorter, the stack is higher. Chainstays are quite long for a race bike. Apart from that, everything else is the same. So next to the Emonda, and incredibly similar, is the Tarmac. This is fading through to the new Tarmac. And there's not much in it there. Which would you go for, the Emonda or the Tarmac? I used to think I'd go for the Emonda, but I think probably definitely the Tarmac now. I hate to admit it at this price, but I do like the look of that. I like this silver. I like the fact that we got away from all that psychedelic stickery stuff we had a few years ago, which I thought was awful. So yeah, I like the look of that. Got the power meter on it as well. Unlike the Emonda, but it's so expensive. So we've got right to the racy end now. Next up, the Cube Lightning. Racy on the graph, racy by name. Pretty fancy colour, this bike, sort of a shiny teal bluey greeny colour. Got this quite cool weave pattern on it. Does have a massive gap here, which is a shame. This is the SRAM Red ETAP Access version, £7,999, 7.6 kilograms. So compare that to the Tarmac, it's relatively cheap, this bike. That's fading through to the Tarmac. Now I have a few problems with this bike, and I've mentioned this before in a previous video, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the things that bothers me, which isn't really about the bike, the race team, Wanty Group Gobert I think they're called, ride this bike, and this is Taco van der Hoorn, who is a wicked rider, got no problem with him, other than the fact he doesn't wear sunglasses, which looks a bit weird. But what bothers me about this team is the outfit. They do look a bit silly, and his hat looks a bit silly. He sort of stands out when he's in a breakaway, not quite looking as cool as everybody else. And actually when you see this outfit on a wide shot, these orange bits on their arms actually look skin coloured, and it looks really weird. Yeah, so there we go. Wanty, sort out your outfits. And then the thing that bothers me about the bike, well, the first thing that bothers me is this big gap here, so let's get rid of that. Close up this gap as well. I really can't stand the generic saddle that comes with Cube bikes, so let's get rid of that. And let's also get rid of this overhang and this nasty plastic thing here. So if we do that, ooh, yeah, that looks better. And then also this crazy bit here where it looks like two bikes sellotaped together. That really doesn't work for me at all. Let's get rid of that. Cool, there we go, that looks much better. Old, new, old, new. I think that's a good looking bike now. So last but by no means least, the Merida Reacto Team, a bike that I've already made a video about, and according to my formula is the most racy bike here. Interesting. If I fade through to that, there she is. That's the Reacto Team Dura Ace Di2, £8,300, and if I remember I will link down below to the video that I made about it the other day. And if we fade between the Reacto Team and the Diverge, we can obviously see the characteristics that the formula has shown us in the list. So there we go, that's all the bikes in my stack today. That's my geometry formula that I've shown you. Hopefully Chris and Chucky, you did get to see your bikes in there and that was some use to you. While we're on the Merida Reacto, can we just take 1 second to appreciate Sonny Colbrelli's Paris-Roubaix masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. This is the winning bike, and if I was a rich man, which clearly I'm not, I would keep offering Merida money until they sold me this bike, because I think this is a collector's item. And actually, when you think about it, quite interesting when you have all the work that some bike manufacturers put into their endurance comfort bikes, which Deceuninck Quickstep rode in Paris-Roubaix, and then the fact that it was won on an aero bike with fat tyres on it. Maybe Specialized will now think about bringing back the Venge with big tyre clearances. Going to be interesting, isn't it? Anyway, the thing I'm going to leave you with is poor old Alexander Richardson, who rides for Alpecin Fenix, was basically attacked the other day in Richmond Park on his bike. 4 guys on motorbikes with machetes attacked him and stole his bike, which I'm guessing was a Canyon Aeroad. But it just goes to show that the insanely escalating prices of our bicycles has made them targets for the scum, and not just when we leave them outside to go and get a coffee. They're actually now worth attempted murder to steal them, and that's quite a worrying thing. So on that rather nasty story, I shall end this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, until next time.